Hello, everyone. We'll just give some people a few more seconds to join and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right, good day and welcome to today's structured conversation. This session is being recorded and closed captioning is available. My name is Marianne Bujakic and I'll be the moderator today. On behalf of SAAL's Professional Learning and Development Committee, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. SAAL and our committee are committed to providing diverse perspectives and identities in our offerings to meet your professional development needs. You can help us achieve this goal by submitting a structured conversation proposal of your own. More information can be found on the SAL Structured Conversations page, and we'll go ahead and include that in the chat for you. During this presentation, we invite you to participate by asking questions, sharing comments, and providing feedback through the chat function that we will be monitoring. Please join me in welcoming our presenter, Dr. Naima Wells. They will introduce themselves and then share their thoughts on leading with empathy in student affairs assessment. So I'm turning it over to you, Naima.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you. I am excited to be here. So, as Marianne mentioned, my name is Naima Wells. I am the executive director, I have to remember that part, of operational impact and success at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. And what I want to speak with you all about today is leading with empathy. Right? This isn't going to be a lecture. I hope that we will work together to co-design a playbook that can be used for us as we do this work. And so I want this to serve as a design lab, right? We're going to deconstruct why assessment sometimes feels heavy and then hopefully rebuild it to be more human-centric. Because I say this a lot. We talk about units, we speak about departments, we talk about data, we speak about metrics, KPIs, and all of those things, but we don't always think about the people who are responsible for doing this work. For example, at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, my role as the Executive Director of Operational Impacts and Success is to make sure that our administrative, student support, student affairs units are documenting or measuring their impact and documenting their success. And I got that from my colleague. We were having a conversation and we were speaking about this work that we do. And so that was and I told her messaging and words matter, and so she mentioned that we help them measure their impact, tell their story of success, and so that's our role. Embry-Riddle has two residential campuses, one in Daytona Beach, one in Arizona. Then we have worldwide off-campus instructional sites everywhere, almost everywhere. We have several of those. So again, I want I want our time together to be a design lab. And what I want us to think about is how, for decades, this red ink pen that you see in my hand and on the screen, this has kind of been a symbol of our work, right? The red pen, because we show up, if you do this work at the institutional level or even at the unit level, we operate as correctors. We tell them, no, you're not, do it this way, make it better that way. Or sometimes people may feel like we're judging the work that they do, or they may feel like, uh-oh, they want to get us, that we're the gotcha squad. And even if we didn't intend to come off that way to our colleagues, sometimes there is some professional trauma that we're walking into that causes them to feel that way, to feel resistant when they encounter us. So I want to start with just a visceral check-in. And throughout this conversation, feel free to jump into the chat with your ideas, because like I said, we're going to co-design this work. We'll hopefully end up with a playbook that we can use. But I want you to look at this word on your screen. When you say it, when you hear it, tell me, how does that make you feel? And I don't want you to filter it. I want you to type the emotion associated with this word in the chat. And like I said, you don't have to filter anything, and be candid. When you see this word assessment, what is your immediate gut reaction? Oh, I like that. Intimidated, clinical, continuous improvement, fun. Darby, hopefully you can help us see things your way. A process, bring it, testing. Yes. Resistance. Yes. Yes. And so I kind of, what I would like for us to do is pivot. I don't want us to think of assessment as we or present assessment as being an intimidation factor, right? Um, but that is true. People may feel intimidated. For someone like me, who I do this work every day, I've done it for, oh goodness, I was about to say decades. Now I'm telling on myself, but I've done it for a long time. How about I just say that? I've done this work for a very long time. And one of the things that I had to come to terms with is the expert's curse. So when I speak to people, I have to go to them with the knowledge that they don't do this every day. They are probably a subject matter expert in their field, but they're not necessarily a subject matter expert in assessment. And I don't want people to feel judged, right? As Karen put in the chat, I don't want people to feel judged. I want them to understand that my role is to be a co-creator, to be a consultant, to be a part of their team, because my job is to make sure our institution as a whole are engaging in this continuous improvement process. So one of the things, and I have research to kind of support this, some of the things that we just saw in the chat, is that we have been operating as enforcers. People view us as enforcers. When we go to their office or when we email them or call them, they may feel like, uh-oh, we're in trouble. The principal's office is reaching out to us. And it may be because we rely on rigid tools like standardized deadlines, inflexible templates, or data requests that we ask for, right? And so we demand a lot of complex human learning to fit within this straight line. So if faculty or staff don't fit the ruler or the straight line, then we say, why don't they get it? What's wrong with them? Why don't they understand what I'm asking for? Sometimes that is just the expert's curse, with the assumption of, if I know this, then everyone should know it, right? It's not rocket science. It's not brain surgery. It's just give me this data, write out a plan, X, Y, and Z. And so, however, I will say, and you all in the chat can correct me if you disagree, because I'm open to this, but I will say there isn't really universal knowledge around assessment. If a person hasn't been introduced to this work, they don't know what we're asking for a lot of the times. It may sound like a foreign language. I kind of compare it to, if you've ever seen Charlie Brown, when they're in their class and the teacher is just talking to them and all you hear is want, 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 want. That's just how I feel when I'm talking to someone and their eyes glaze over and they're like checked out, because they're like, I don't understand it. And so that is just my interpretation, and I'm glad, Brooke, yes. I'm glad that you can relate to this feeling, right? So what I propose is that to fix this, we operate as if that assumption is false. We operate as if, no, they don't know anything. That's how we approach this work. And so we become more flexible, and we implement what I want to talk to us about today, and that's an empathetic design for assessment work. And I want to just preface all of this by saying that what I'm going to talk to you all about, the empathetic design, it requires us to use different tools. So we're no longer going to be very rigid and using the ruler, the yardstick. We're not doing that anymore. What we are going to do is work as enablers or supporters so that we can wrap our assessment process around the reality of the work that has to be done, the human centered work that has to be done at our institutions. See, I thank you, Kayla. I wanted to bring something extra, so I appreciate the love for the props, the prop appreciation. Thank you. So, what I want us to do first is ground ourselves for the remainder of this conversation in actual evidence. So, around this time last year, I conducted a national research study um, that shows that sometimes resistance stems from very specific gaps. And so we may have a myth or we blame our colleagues' attitude, like they just don't get it. They're resistant. They don't want to do the work. But usually there is a gap that exists, and it could be a gap in time. They don't have time to do the work effectively and efficiently. They don't have the knowledge, so they need more guidance, or they don't have support from university leadership. And so I want us to work together as we proceed through this and help become thought partners on how we can maybe approach or deal with some of these gaps. So, first, I want to talk to you a little bit about the actual study that I'm referring to. I conducted a mixed methods convergent study. There was a pretty small sample, but 111 quantitative survey participants. There were more, but some, you know, were their responses were incomplete, so they were deleted. Those incomplete responses were deleted. And I also conducted 16 conversations, and then I triangulated those data, and I'm still learning things from those data. And so I mentioned the other day that I would love it if I could bring a group of people together to help interpret some of these findings in the context of this work that we do. So most of the participants they self-identified as mid-level admins. And if you have questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. If you want me to pause or talk about something a little more in depth, feel free. But one of the things that was very important, and the study was designed for assessment practitioners, specifically who deal with administrative and student affairs or student support services assessment, so outside of the classroom. But we did get some faculty who've done lots of different types of assessment throughout their years. And so a lot of the participants self-identified as mid-level administrators. And I think what I interpreted that to mean is that they have influence from the middle, right? Have to have influence. They influence the top, the down, sideways. They have to influence in all of these directions, but they may not have the authority to make decisions. They don't necessarily write institutional policies that may impact this work, and so they have they're up against a barrier themselves, right? And 68% of the respondents self-identified as having 11 plus years of experience. So we're not talking about rookies. We're talking about people who have done this work, they have experience. And so I would lean heavily on what they have had, what their experiences are, and what they shared throughout this process, the study process. One of the things that stood out to me, and I think this is a central conflict, overwhelmingly, and I would say 91% of respondents or participants said that, yes, I value this work. There is value in doing this work. But there were other things that showed up, like them struggling to track the impact of the decisions they make based on their assessment data. And there isn't necessarily a mechanism in place to request the needed resources. And again, I think most of us recognize the value of assessment, but we may struggle to actually close the loop. And I think that another important thing that stood out to me is that the participants also agreed that their institution has a very student-centric focus. But again, they don't necessarily have a process for tracking the impacts of their assessment work or any of the assessment related decisions. And they don't necessarily have a process in place for requesting resources to continue to do this work. So, for example, if I go through this process of assessment and I identify that, oh, you know what? Our response time, our time to response is lagging. And what we realize is that we need an additional staff person or we need new software. They're saying, and from my interpretation, is that yes, we identify these needs, we identify these areas of improvement, but there isn't a straightforward way for us to go to our institutional leadership to request resources for these interventions or for these additional programs or software that may help us improve our work or the services that we provide. And so I mentioned earlier that there is a gap, and I want to understand, why do some of these gaps exist? And I'll tell you three specific gaps I identified a little bit later, but they seem to be very systemic barriers, right? One thing that stood out a lot, especially in the qualitative interviews, that there's a lack of time, lack of know-how. People don't necessarily know what is being asked of them. They don't really understand, like, what exactly are we being asked to do? And another thing is there's not a lot of collaboration. There's a lot of silos. So we'll talk about why I think some of those silos exist. But what I want to ask you all in the chat, tell me if any of the barriers on the screen, the primary sources of discord, do any of these resonate with you from your experience at your institution? All of them, the top three. So, staffing. So, I am very happy to know that you all are kind of validating some of what was found in the data, time and knowledge. Yes, yes. Okay, so I'm on the right track. I'm on the right track. Thank you all. I will call on you a little bit more as I proceed. So, one of the things I mentioned before is that sometimes there is a resistance myth, but I think it's probably more like a resistance paradox in which our colleagues or departments don't have a bad attitude about assessment. Now, sometimes they do. um, Sometimes they do, but sometimes it's just exhaustion. They wear 50 million hats and they're being tugged on from 50 million directions. And so, what I would like in my work to do is move from, oh, what's wrong, what is the problem, why aren't they being responsive, why aren't they doing what I asked them to do the first time, why don't they fully read the emails, but how do we address this, how do we fix this? Because 56% of the participants in the study, they disagree that departments are resistant to change or resistant to engaging in this process. And one of the stories that came out is that they don't know what they don't know, right? And so someone in my role would be responsible for designing a process that accounts for those gaps in knowledge, in time. And now I can't wave a magic wand. That goes back to having influence, but not the authority to make university level decisions. I can't promise anyone that, okay, if you go through this assessment process, at the end of it, all of your problems will be solved. You will get a bigger building, a bigger office, more staff, more technology, more money. Listen, assessment isn't a world changer, right? It does not do that. I don't think it's designed for that, but that's a conversation for another day. But I like to ground myself in reality and what the evidence actually tells me, right? And so what we're seeing on the screen now is that this is just to reinforce some of what the reality is for a lot of our colleagues. They don't agree that there is a straightforward process for requesting resources. And that a lack of time, for me, I interpret that as a systemic failure, not necessarily always, not always, time management issue. So a lot of times people say, well, I'm busy doing my actual job, that the assessment work is just an additional thing that I have to do, that I have to tag on, and it's just more work for me to do. My approach is to figure out how can we embed this process into the work that you're doing on a day-to-day basis. Because let's be honest, from the institutional level, right? We do use assessment for accreditation, right? We do. That's one of the reasons we use it, but I never lead with that. I want people to understand that when you write out a great plan from the beginning, you set yourself up for success. But there are barriers that will possibly impede them from actually carrying out their plan the way that they intended to. And that's where it comes time to be very flexible, not to diminish the rigor, not to cut back on the requirements or the expectations, not to diminish any of that, but let's be more realistic and more flexible with what we're asking of our colleagues. So, what I want you all to do is help me interpret these findings. So far, from what I've discussed and what you've seen with regards to the data that I've shown you, tell me, how do you interpret these findings? What do these data tell you just from the surface level at first glance? What do you interpret all of this to mean to you? And put it in the context of your institution, right? So at your institution, how do you reconcile or interpret the fact that we have highly skilled, very experienced people who are doing this work, and they are saying that, yeah, there isn't a straightforward process. There isn't a way for us to, you know, do all of this work and balance all of this work. That doesn't exist for us. So I want us to work together. And in the chat, just tell me, do you think that, or how would you interpret these data? That's the question. Not everyone has to jump in the chat all at once. I was in a session before once where someone said they have the teacher stare where they can just wait and wait until someone puts a response in the chat. I don't have that. I don't think the time will allow me to do that. So I'm going to move on. But as we go, please feel free to jump in the chat. Oh, we have one taker. I appreciate that. Just from the surface, it seems like institutional culture is the root of many of these. Jess, I think you're picking up what I'm putting down. Okay. And so that's what I want us to talk about. I think you are on the right track. Do we take the time to include people in the process we want to implement? Right. And so I tell people all of the time that, and I've said this during our conversation here today, people in advising in the registrar's office, they are the subject matter experts in their specific area. And so from my role is to be the subject matter expert in this continuous improvement assessment work. I don't need them to be an expert in this, but I need to be cognizant and aware of how the process that I design impacts them in their day-to-day work. So I want to talk about the gaps. So throughout this conversation, I've been talking about the gaps. And so there's during the triangulation of the survey and interview data, it revealed that there are some gaps. There are many. But what we will focus on today is how these gaps may be the result of a scarcity loop. And so I've identified a few things. And at first glance, you'll see that at the top of this triangle, the triangle of resistance, I have the balance gap. And that was taken from an item in the survey that asked, do you find it difficult, ask participants if they found it difficult to balance their assessment work with their day-to-day work, right? And you'll see that the mean score seems pretty high, right? This isn't a bad mean score, but I think mixed with the standard deviation, I think it masks a high rate of operational sludge. And I think this comes in the form of a compliance tax or a time tax. And it's where people are required to do a lot of work, but with very limited information or resources or time, right? I think it's a symptom of shadow work as well, where they're burning human capital to subsidize structural deficits. So in the chat, when you put in the chat that the institution isn't necessarily set up, designed for the people who are doing this work to take that into account, I think that a lot of human capital is being burned to subsidize that structural deficit. And so they have just enough energy or time or resources to stay compliant, but zero slack for innovation or deep analysis into what they're finding. And Vanessa asked, do you think having shared frameworks where we emphasize purposeful data rather than just more data for data? Oh my goodness, Vanessa. Yes. I will tell you, one of the things that I highly, strongly believe in is let's not collect data for data's sake. And that goes back to how we design the process. Design it in a way that in which we are working with a shared goal in mind. And I'll just take a little detour here. At Riddle, we do have a framework for the institution in its Plan, Do, Check Act. Some institutions may use Plan, Do, Study Act. So that's just our umbrella. That's our vehicle that's going to drive us to continuous improvement, right? And so I think that we definitely have to emphasize the purposeful data collection. Only write out a plan or design a plan that is designed to make sense of what we're seeing, to be used to make decisions based on these data. Let's not collect data just for the sake of saying, yeah, I checked the box, I did it. So yes, I agree. And now I'm back. I'm done for my little tangent with my tangent. So one of the other gaps is a collaboration gap. So in one of the previous slides and in the chat, someone mentioned that there are silos, right? And so one of the items in the survey touched on lack of departmental collaboration. So I don't know if I don't think it's just a social failure. I think it may be more of a economic one. I'll use that word because it proves that the institution is paying a very high silo tax. Because if there aren't shared frameworks, shared processes, or even shared data within and between departments at an institution, then we are going to pay a price for that. The other thing, this is aligned with the lack of a mechanism for requesting resources. There isn't a straightforward process for requesting additional resources for this work. And the hidden tax on all of this, I think, is innovation. We don't have time to deep dive into the data. We're not given the luxury of being able to think, okay, how can we address this? How can we come up with innovative solutions? Not just for the sake of saying we are innovative, but actually addressing the real problems that exist within the institutions. At the heart of this, we should be mission driven. Most of our institutions within our mission, we're student focused, and the data did show that a lot of institutions, a lot of the participants said that their institution has a very student centric focus. They're focused on their student success. And so how do we make sure that we're keeping up with the times? One of the things that is impacting higher ed is the current poly crisis, in which we're in this global tangle of all things happening at once that we have to contend with as institutions. And so the fact that the process for requesting resources scored very low in the out of all of the items, it suggests that the barrier isn't just that resources don't exist, but the mechanism to access them is broken. And so I think this is a classic learning cost. Moynihan has a framework, and this is related to my public administration life, my previous life. Moynihan has a framework in which he I'm just going to basically, there are administrative burdens of accessing services. Then it leads to people not even wanting to try to deal with accessing these services or dealing with the going through the minutia of the bureaucracy of even getting what they need if the administrative burden is so heavy. And so people just stop out. They opt out. Like, I don't have the time to navigate all of these loopholes. And so things fall by the wayside. And so staff can't easily navigate the bureaucracy to get what they need. They just eventually stop asking. One of the things I mentioned before, and even on this slide, is professional trauma. And that came up in the study. One person mentioned the professional trauma at their institution was that new administration came in, new university administration came in. They required everyone to reapply for their positions, their roles, and not everyone was rehired. That resulted in professional trauma. That was one component of the professional trauma in which people felt like all of this work was used against them. The assessment work was used against them. And I always try to make it very clear that this isn't punitive. We're not going to use this against you. It's not a judgment on you, but it is hopefully a vehicle for us to seek continuous improvement and make the changes that we need to make at our institution. Just as I've worked in academic assessment at an institution with heavy professional trauma from mass faculty firing based on program assessment, but even then the faculty weren't afraid of data, they were afraid of not being included in the analysis and the interpretation of those data. That interpretation piece is so valuable because, again, like I said, I am at my institution, hopefully I'm the subject matter expert in the operational or the administrative and student support services assessment, but I'm not the expert in admissions or the registrar's office or facilities or HR. And so it makes sense for them to be the main interpreters of those data because from my perspective, I can assume anything, but I don't necessarily know what's happening, the reality of their actual work. Neva says, and I hope I pronounced your name correctly, we have a faculty member who I believe has PTSD from dealing with the last assessment director. She shakes when I meet with her. And that is what, I started out with. We don't want people to think, oh no, here comes the enforcer. We don't want to be a trigger for our colleagues. And so we don't want people, and again, depending on your level of decision making at your institution, some of these things there's nothing you can do about it, but you may be able to influence a change. And so hopefully at the end of this, we'll have some tools or ideas of how we can do that. And so some of the professional traumas that people have responsibility for assessment, but they don't necessarily have authority to compel data collection, data utilization, data interpretation, data usage, any of those things, or standardize the reporting across silos. They are held accountable for outcomes that they can't even control. And this creates the psychological cost, right? And the stress of being held responsible for a machine that you aren't even allowed to steer. You're not even in control of this machine. And so I think this is the story of a lot of institutions. And if you look at the flow of this image on your screen, one of the things is that the broken request or the vertical request line is broken. And then it may lead us to stop sharing laterally with our colleagues, with other departments. And that leads into the silo effect. And because we are isolated or even under-resourced, assessment feels like it is attacking our mission. So not just the institution level mission, but the unit level mission as well. It impedes us from being able to do our work effectively or efficiently, or even just doing it well. And so today, hopefully we can break some of these lines and fill in some of those gaps that we've identified so far, because we may not be able to fix the request resources problem today, but we can maybe work on fixing the collaboration issue. And so in the chat, I want you to tell me at your institution which gap that has been identified so far is the widest at your institution. Is it the balance gap of being able to balance your work with the assessment work and all of the other things? Is it the collaboration gap? Are you in silos at your institution? Or is it the resource mechanism, requesting resources mechanism? Which of those gaps do you think is more prevalent or the widest at your institution? If you would just put that in the chat. Data maturity and assessment culture. Yeah, I would say that's probably one of the issues that I've seen a lot is I would say the maturity of the cultures overall is going from novices to being further along in the process. Collaboration resources, yeah, I think silos exist a lot in institutions, and it may be that people feel like I have to hoard this data, especially if there isn't a very good data governance policy at the institution. People feel protective over their data. They feel like it's my data. And so resources, specifically knowledge and time. And that ties back to the assumption that people know when they see an email from you, they automatically know what it is you're asking them for. And that's not always the case, right? So now I want us to discuss some possible solutions. Resources is always, I think that's going to be an issue. And then when you have to contend with turnover, so that knowledge gap, you basically start over from scratch with a new person if they are unfamiliar with assessment. So it's an ongoing cycle, right? So I mentioned before that my proposed solution to all of this, these gaps, these challenges, is an empathetic design. And I don't want you all to interpret that to mean that we lower the standards, right? Oh, well, if they can't do it, we just won't ask them to do it anymore. Or if they can't do it well, then we'll accept what they give us. No, that's not what it is. It's finding the sweet spot between where institutional rigor meets user reality. And I think that overlap is where sustainable assessment happens. And that's where we use our flexible tools. We aren't relying on the more rigid tools. We're thinking in terms of what is the reality? What do we need as an institution, right? But what can we expect our colleagues to actually do? And how do we sustain this over time? And how do we reach maturity, right? And so this may be the hardest slide for us to interpret or internalize, and we don't, we just are taking a look right here, no judgment. But I think at the end of the day, we want to be solution oriented. We want to be problem solvers or the enablers. But under pressure, sometimes we have to default to being the enforcer. So if we look at the left, have you sent an email similar to what you see on your screen here, where did you submit the data? And did you assume that no response means that they're not compliant? And I'll tell you that I said earlier that words matter, language matters. I don't lead with compliance. That's not the reason why I tell our departments that we're doing this work. Is not specifically for compliance. Of course, we have accreditors. We know that. But I think taking the enforcer approach is mathematically doomed because it's off-putting. People are like, "Ugh, I have one more thing to do, and you're asking me for one more thing." And I think that in the data, it does show that assessment conflicts with other departmental priorities, right? So if I act as an enforcer, I'm ignoring the actual conflict that exists with that balancing gap, right? I'm telling my colleagues or the departments to prioritize doing this paperwork because maybe that's how they internalize it. Do this paperwork and maybe ignore the student in your lobby or the other fires that they have to put out. And I don't want to lean into gaslighting them into believing that this assessment work is this is the be all end all and you have to do it and it's the most important thing. That's not the truth, right? It's important. There is value in it, but let's figure out a more strategic way of incorporating it with the work that you're already doing. And I think that the enabler looks at that and asks, how do we lower the friction so you can do both? So that you can manage your day to day work and also give me the data or the information that I need. And again, like I said, language matters, but also timing matters. And so you have to be intentional with all of your communications and design a process that sets your colleagues up for success. So now I want us to get into kind of a role play scenario type of thing. I want you to meet Alex, right? You think Alex is ghosting you. And so your instinct is telling you to send them a follow up email that says, per my last email. But we're going to resist this instinct. And as you can see, we have a task and we have a tool. And so instead of emailing Alex, what I want us to do is diagnose Alex's reality. There are a lot of words on the screen, but pretty much what I'll sum it up is that Alex is the director of student life. Alex is a campus star. Everyone enjoys Alex. They're high performing. They are just always typically responsive. They're a perfect person. But the situation is it's mid-October, peak homecoming week. Alex has not responded to your emails. They've missed 2 deadlines. And this year, your office, the Office of Institutional Effectiveness, I'll call it, has created a new comprehensive Excel template. And you think, oh, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. And it has 5 tabs to capture data. And you all may not use Excel to capture your data. You may use Anthology Planning or Watermark, Planning and Self-Study, or Nuventive, or whatever your assessment management system may be. And so you sent a gentle reminder last week, urgent past due. And Alex still hasn't replied. What your mission is, and we're going to do this together, is not solve the lateness or any of that, but to solve where the friction is coming in with Alex. And so I don't want you to think that Alex is mean or Alex is avoiding you, but perhaps Alex knows that they can't effectively and efficiently do the work that you're asking them to do. They can't balance all of the things they're asked to do, and they're terrified to share what they have because maybe they've experienced that professional trauma, or maybe they're embarrassed. They don't feel like it's good enough because they may think they will be judged or it's punitive. And so one of the things too, the study found that collaboration scores were low, right? And so I want us to solve for the fear or the fact that Alex may be overwhelmed. And how do we make it safe for Alex to share that information or to engage in the process? So this is the empathy map. So if you can understand what Alex sees, in addition to that new spreadsheet or that new template that you just sent them, and what they feel, perhaps shame, confusion, overwhelmed, whatever they're feeling, then you will know exactly what to write in your next email, right? Your next communication. And maybe it's not an email, maybe it's a phone call, maybe it's a visit to Alex's office to have a little bit of coffee or something, not related to work. And so as we are going through this map, remember that the language is what matters, right? And you don't want to be the enforcer. You want to be an enabler or a supporter and think in terms of how can you help Alex. So what in the chat, please tell me, what do you think an empathetic intervention looks like? What could we do instead of just sending Alex another email or another request for information? What could we do instead? And so you can place it in the chat, but I'm also going to place a link to a Padlet in which we can share some information together and we can work on that together. In the left column of the Padlet, we're co-designing our culture. In the left column, you can tell us what do we stop doing, And then in the right column, you can tell us, what do we start doing to support? How do we support Alex? So I've given you two options. You can either place your responses in the chat, or you can go to the Padlet and enter your responses there. And let me know in the chat if you have any issues navigating the Padlet. But what we're responding to is, what does an empathetic intervention look like? What do we stop doing? How do we address the friction? And then what do we start doing? How do we provide Alex with support? Stop sending nasty grams. I like that. I like that idea. And actually, I want to call Alex or set up a meeting to learn what Alex needs to be successful. Yes. Have a non-work related conversation. That's one of the things we do at Realtor. We have our just checking in emails in which we don't have an agenda. We just say, hey, do you have about 15 minutes to chat? That's it. Schedule a quick check-in via Zoom or in person to understand the support Alex needs. Being able to see someone lands differently. Yes, that's how you build rapport, working with people. Great answers. Great. See, this is what I like. Thank you. Do not CC their supervisor. That shouldn't be the immediate response. That is wonderful. Great. So we are on the right track. And if you all want to continue adding to the Padlet, I appreciate that. And so I didn't put the QR code, but this is what we should be looking at. This is how we're building our virtual playbook. We're going to harvest all of this wisdom to build our playbook. And we're going to continue, hopefully, at the end of this, we'll have some ideas of what we can take back to our institutions um, to have more of a empathetic design for our work. And so I appreciate this. Responsive deadlines that recognize campus events. Yes. So, yes, check in on Alex in person. I read that one. Offer multiple ways for them to get info to you. I like that. So one of the things that I do is with some of the people who I know, they are willing to do the work. They want to do this work and they want to do it well. I give them different options. I have we use this anthology as our assessment management system, but I have created a template. It's a PDF, a fillable PDF, and they can just plug their information into that PDF, send it to me or in a Word document, and I'll paste it into the system. Or we have some GPTs. We have agents, AI agents that are designed to help them work through what outcomes relate to their goals and their missions and how they can do that work. And that is designed to relieve some of that administrative burden that they experience. Um, yeah, I agree. This is a big one. Um, it makes more enemies. And I'm looking at CCing their supervisor. Yes, let's not CC supervisors. I like that idea. uh, but yes, I appreciate you all for sharing your insights, because what we have to understand and know is that we cannot fix the entire culture between today and Monday. By Monday, we can't make sure that all of these things stop happening, but what we can change is one interaction, right? And we can do one thing differently. And I would like to just say that if we can make a commitment to doing one thing, one of our Monday morning commitments, what would that be? What would one of those things be for us with regards to making a commitment to doing things differently or doing things better? So that's just my thought for you all, to take a takeaway thought for you all. And so now I want to open the floor for Q&A. If you all have questions for me, if you want to take a deeper dive into any of this, I would like to open the floor to you all so that we can have a bi-directional conversation. You've listened to me for about 50 minutes, and now I want to open the floor so that I can listen to you all. If you have questions or anything, please feel free to put them in the chat. And maybe we can workshop some things together, brainstorm some ideas together. Oh, yes. Thank you, Tori. Yes, feel free to unmute if you want to because we're co-designers. We're co-designing all of this work. So if you have things that you want to add to the conversation, I am happy to hear because I want to learn from you all as well. So Brooke says we have a long history of non-compliance and we've implemented a moratorium on curricular changes, academic programs. Okay. This is in part because our 5th year review is coming up. How could we reduce friction and still empower our programs to participate instead of box check? That is a great idea. A few things come to mind without knowing the context of your institution, not knowing a lot about your institution. But I think that one way to reduce this friction is have a conversation, like bring people to the table and have a conversation with them. I don't know how, what the structure is at your institution, but I think it would be valuable to ask them, right? How do they foresee reducing that friction? And I will say that, of course, you can't make everyone happy all of the time, but some of the things, the ideas that were shared in the Padlet, have a conversation with the faculty if it's specifically for your academic programs and they aren't if you've implemented the moratorium on curricular changes, what are some other things that may be effective or efficient tools to implement that can get people to engage in the process? I think one of the more important things is how they should feel some ownership over the actual process itself, right? I know at our institution, not everyone not all of the ideas that are shared with us can be implemented, but I do think that there should be a sense of ownership that this part of it for our unit or for our academic program level assessment, they should feel some type of ownership. And sometimes people just want to be heard, they want to be seen. And I would like to say that compliance may not necessarily be the issue. It may be that they just don't see the value in it. Maybe they're asking what's in it for me outside of accreditation. And so maybe not leading with accreditation would be a good first step. Help them see what's in it for them. Jess says, I don't have an idea or an answer, but I'm about to need to implement some new tech processes for already overburdened student services managers. And this is making me reconsider the approaches I could take to enable rather than enforce. And I think that will get you greater buy-in, Jess, is to actually try and understand what they're dealing with. And again, we're not telling them that you don't have to adhere to the rigor, the data, the rigorous of collecting good data, because let's be honest, garbage in equals garbage out. So if we're not setting ourselves up for success or designing a process on the front end that's going to set us up for success, then it's not going to work out for us on the back end. And so we're going to run into issues where when it's time for reaffirmation or any of the accreditation steps that we have to go through, then we're not going to have good data to represent what we've actually been doing, the good work we've actually been doing. And that's one of the ways that I phrase this is that you're doing the good work. Let's figure out a way to document it. Let's show the value that you're bringing to the institution. Let's show how your outcomes align to the institution's strategic goals or aligns to the institution's mission. And that's one of the things that we've set up for us in anthology is that the units, they have their own mission, they have their own goals. A lot of the heavy lifting is done at the outcomes level, and that's where they show, okay, our outcome aligns to this strategic goal, this strategic initiative. And they talk to us about these are the strategies we're implementing, and these are the data we're collecting, and these are the tools we're using. And then towards the end, they tell us, what did they find out? What are they going to do differently? And then what did they learn throughout this process? And how are they going to apply what they learned to the next cycle? And so, with that being said, I apologize if I wasn't able to answer your question, Brooke, or give you any helpful insights. But I think there may be opportunities without knowing the full context of your institution, how your institution is set up. But hopefully, there has been some value from this conversation that we've had and this time we've shared together. And if there aren't any other questions or comments that you all would like to share, then I am going to turn it back over to maybe Mary Ann or some of our SAAL colleagues so that they can close us out. And thank you all again.
Thanks so much, Dr. Wells. As we wrap up, let's give our speaker a round of applause. Thank you, Dr. Naima
Thank you.
Wells, for sharing your insights today. A recording of today's session, along with any resources, will be shared via email and available on SAAL's website. And we hope to see you at our next structured conversation, which is going to be on March 6th at 2 p.m. And the session is titled Assessment Essentials Revisited: Lessons from a Decade of Practice for Today's Higher Education Leaders. You can register or submit a proposal to present. More details are available on our website. And thanks again for joining us, and have a great day.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.